Hello, welcome to another online lecture in the Computer Architecture course. In this lecture series, we are looking at what makes a computer, and in the previous lectures, we have looked at the fundamentals of computer architecture and a brief introduction and some of the basic components that make up a basic computer. So, in today's lecture, what we are going to focus on is the memory. So in previous week, we have looked at the key components of a computer, key components of a computer system, and identified the three main components as the CPU, the main memory, and the I/O module. So we identify that the CPU is the one that is going to do the bulk of the computing parts. The main memory is going to store things while they are being processed by the CPU. The input-output module is going to be responsible to bringing in and taking out data in and out of the particular computer system. And in addition to this, we will also have what is called the system bus that is going to connect all of these components together. So that is essentially what we looked so far in the previous weeks, and last week we looked at the CPU in much more detail. So today we are going to look at the main memory in much more detail. So before we start our deep dive into main memory, it's best to understand the various types of memory that can be used in a computing system. And one of the tools, or one of the easiest ways to understand these variety of memories, is using what is called a memory hierarchy. So this memory hierarchy that you see in this diagram is a way of identifying the memories, different types of memories, based on the various criteria such as their speed, their cost, and their sizes. So if we take this one, in this diagram, we see a number of different types of memories identified here, starting from CPU registers all the way to external storages such as tape drives. So we have CPU registers, cache memories, RAMs, hard disks, and other offline storage mechanisms. Then we can see from the bottom up, the speed of these devices is growing faster and faster. So the lowest in the hierarchy are the slowest devices, and the ones in the top are the fastest devices. So we are going from very slow devices into fast devices. On the other hand, if we look at the cost is going down when we go down the hierarchy. So the things at the top of the hierarchy are more expensive, and the things at the bottom of the hierarchy are the least expensive type of memories. With this in mind, what we be able to have in a computing system, or what we would normally have in a computing system, is, depending on the type of memories, we will have, or we can have, because they are much least expensive, we can have a large amount of the slower type of memories. They are inexpensive, but they are slower, so we can have a large number of them. But if we think about the faster type of memories, the problem becomes, because they are much expensive, we may not be able to have a lot of them in our computer system. So we may have only small quantities of them. So things like CPU registers and cache memories, we will only have small quantities of them. Whereas if we think about hard disks or other offline storage mechanisms, we may have large quantities of them, say in the tune of terabytes versus bytes or megabytes in the case of cache memories. The other way that we can categorize memory is based on where these memories are located within a computing system. So if we think about these various categories of memories, from cache memory to RAM to hard disk and so on, they can be located in various places within a computing system. So the first category is things that are located with or closer to the CPU. So these are the registers and cache memory. So these are the ones that are going to be located closer to the CPU. Then we are going to have what can be called as the internal memories. So these are the main memories, or what we call as RAMs. They are going to be located much closer to the CPU as well, and we identify that as internal. Then the last category is what we call the external memories, and these are the hard disks and other removable mediums that can be considered as external memories. Here the differentiation between external and internal needs to be understood in the context of the previous overview that we looked at, identifying the key components of a computer. So what we have identified is the key components of a computer are the CPU, the main memory, and the I/O devices. So these three things are going to be considered as the key components of a computer, and these things we will consider as the internal components of the computer. So anything else we will consider them as external. So even hard disks, even though they may be contained within the same computer package, we would still consider them as external devices. The other thing that we can look at in terms of these different types of memories is how data transfer is going to happen between the various memory types. So if we think about internal memories, in internal memories, it is possible for them to be read and written at bit level. So we can read and write number of bits at one time, and this is the case for main memory, for example. And the amount of data that can be read and write would be determined by the bus width of that particular computing system. And we previously identified that bus width is the amount of data or amount of parallel number of bits that can be transferred in a computing system in that data bus. So the amount of data transfer in internal memory will be determined by the bus width of that particular computer system. And we may need to have some level of addressing mechanisms within this computing system, and this addressing may or may not differ from the word length that we have here. We can look at this in much more detail later on. And as we said, the main thing to remember here is, depending on the data bus width, which is we normally identified as either it's a 32-bit system or a 64-bit system, the bus width of the processor will determine how much of data is being transferred back and forth within that internal memory communication. But on the other hand, if we think of external memory, here we will use the concept of blocks, which will be much larger than a word, and they will be the one that we are using to transfer data back and forth with external storage mediums, external memory. So for example, between the hard disk and the main memory, we will use the concept of blocks to transfer data, whereas within internal memories we will use words. Another way that we can look at memories is the way that we access them, the methods that we are going to use to access them. There are two main ways of accessing memory. One is sequential access, the other one is direct access. For the case of sequential access, a good example is a tape recorder. I'm not sure whether you are from the generation that knows what a tape recorder is or a cassette recorder is, but it is essentially a magnetic medium that is recorded in a long tape, and you can read from the start to the end in that order, in that sequential order. So that's the main idea of a sequential read or sequential memory access. So if we take a tape, for example, and say this is the tape that we have, and we have various files and data written in that tape, and say we want to access the file that is here and then access the file that is here. So if this is what we need, what we will have to do is we will have to start from the beginning of the tape. We will have to go through the tape, read this one, and then continue going and then read that one. But we will have to pass through all these places to reach that. So that is the basic idea of sequential access. On the other hand, when we think about direct access, in direct access what we will have is the concept of blocks. So here we will have a certain number of blocks that are there that are storing data, and in that case, say if we want to access this block and then this block and then this block of data, there's no need for us to go in a sequential order from one to the other to the other. What we can do is we can go read this one, we can come read this one, and then we can go read that one. So that is the main idea behind reading direct access. So the direct access, we will be able to read any point of the data without considering where it is located. And a good example is hard disks are a good example for a direct access memory medium. So now, if we think about the memories that are used in a computer system, one of the common categories or one of the common technologies that may be used to construct these memories is using semiconductor materials. And these type of memories we would identify as semiconductor memory. One of the common examples that we would come across these semiconductor memories is the RAM in a general computing system. So the RAM, or the random access memory in a general computing system, is a good example of a memory that is constructed using semiconductor electronic materials, whereas a tape drive or a magnetic hard disk are based on other technologies. This is based on semiconductor technology. And these memories can be either both, we can read these memories and write, so they are read-write memories. But also, one of the things to remember, especially in the case of RAMs, is that they are volatile. What we mean by volatility in a memory is when the power is switched off from the computer, whatever the data that is stored in that memory will be lost. So whatever that we store in that memory will be lost when we remove the power from the system. So that is what we mean by volatility in a computer. So that means they become temporary storages. So we cannot use them as permanent storages, because once we remove power, they will lose whatever the data that is stored in them. So they can be used as temporary storages. And within RAMs, we will have two categories, static RAMs and dynamic RAMs, based on what is the underlying hardware technology that is used. We will discuss them a bit later. in such a memory situation or such a memory system, two main things that needs to happen is reading data and writing data. So in this context, we will look at the operation of reading and writing data into a single memory cell. So in the previous week, we have already looked at that we will have address lines, data lines, and control lines that are going to give signals to memory. They are connecting these things to the CPU and the memory. So what we will have here is, we can have, say, let's take writing for example. We want to write a particular data at a particular point in the memory. So what we will have is, we will select that particular location by giving the address through the select line. Then we will place the data that needs to be written in the data bus, and we will place the data here. Then we will go to the control bus and say write the data. So now what will happen is, whatever the data that is in the data bus will be written to the memory cell that is selected through the address bus, and the writing action is specified by the control bus. Then if we look at the case of reading data, again we will select from where we want to read through the select, and we will be reading, or we will be waiting to get the information from the data bus or the sense point. So then we will specify whether it's a read or write through the control bus or the control line. So what we will do is, we will come and select the memory location. We will keep open, waiting to get some data from here, from the sense, and then we will say it's a read. So what we will end up with is a place where we can read the data or write the data using these three communication lines. So this is the basic or the fundamental memory operation at the very fundamental unit of reading or writing data. So now let's look at the two main categories of RAMs as we earlier identified. So we have static RAMs and dynamic RAMs, and the main differentiation between these two are the underlying hardware technologies that are used there. Static RAMs are based on flip-flops or on-off switches, where flip-flops are those on-off switches, and those are the ones that are going to keep ones and zeros, whereas dynamic RAMs are going to use capacitors. So the main advantage of using static RAMs is, they don't have the issue of charge leaking or the need for refreshing. We will look at that when we are discussing dynamic RAMs. But the main disadvantage with static RAMs is, they are much more complex because they are using flip-flops. And as you may know from previous courses, a flip-flop is constructed with at least a number of basic electronic components. So it is going to be a much complex construction for each individual bit. So, and then because it's much more complex and more components are used, it can also be much more expensive. So the advantage is there that it doesn't leak charges, no refresh is needed, but it can be more expensive and more complex. But the main advantage here is, static RAMs are much faster than dynamic RAMs. So they sit on top of the memory hierarchy as faster memory technologies. So we would normally use them as cache memory. So we would use static RAMs as cache memories. And if we take dynamic memories are constructed using capacitors, and the main problems they have is capacitors will lose their capacitance over time. So a basic capacitor is something that is charged between a positive and negative at a particular set voltage. So let's say if it is a 3 voltage capacitor, it will charge to 3 voltage. So when it is 3 voltage, we will consider that as the bit value 1, and when it is 0 voltage, that is the bit value 0. So that is the 0 and 1 in the memory storage. But the problem here is, over time, this voltage value will be lost in a capacitor. That's how capacitors work. They are charge leak. So we would need to refresh their charges from time to time. So from time to time, we will have to come and refresh them. So even though they are simpler construction, because we only need a capacitor, not much complex circuitry is needed in a single bit representation, and they can be less expensive. The problem is they can be much slower compared to static RAMs. So dynamic RAMs can be much slower compared to dynamic RAMs, but they are less expensive. So again, considering the memory hierarchy, dynamic RAMs can be much more useful as main memories, whereas static RAMs are much more useful as cache memories. So that is the main difference between static and dynamic RAMs. So if we think about dynamic RAMs and how dynamic RAMs operate and how read and write would work in a dynamic RAM, we can understand it through this particular diagram. So what we have in this diagram is, we have an address line. The address line is going to specify at what location things needs to be read or written. There's a common ground here, and this bit line is the one that is going to specify the actual data that needs to be written. So what we have here is, there is a transistor that is sitting in between the data line and the storage capacitor. So based on what is selected, or based on which transistor is selected through the address line, so whenever this particular transistor is selected, whatever the data value in the bit line and the storage capacitor will be transmitted across the transistor. So if we think about the case of writing a value, so when we say we want to write a value, what we have is, say we have a value of 1 in the bit line and we want to write it to the capacitor. So what we would do is, we would start from the address line and we would select this particular transistor, and that is the one where we want to write this particular value, particular bit value. So when this address line is selected, what is going to happen is, whatever the value that is set at the bit line is going to transfer across to the capacitor. So now the capacitor is going to become 1. Now say for example, if we wanted to write a 0, we would have set this bit line as 0, again similarly selected this address line. Now the value 0 would be transmitted across here, so we would have written a 0 here. Now let's take the example of reading a value from the storage capacitor. So let's take the example, there is a 1 in the storage capacitor currently, that is the stored value. We want to read that out. So what we would do is, we would take this 1 in the storage capacitor, we would select that particular memory location through the address line, and that value will be transmitted back to the bit line, and that will become 1. So now we can read and write in this dynamic RAM. So we identified that one of the main problems that we will have in dynamic RAMs, in capacitor based dynamic RAMs, is they will lose their capacitance over time, so they will lose their value. So we need to do refreshing of the memory. So what do we mean by refreshing of the memory is, say for example, let's take the example of we have these 10 memory locations in our memory. So each of these memory locations may have different memory values written in them, zeros, ones. There can be different values written in them. So that is basically a simple memory that we are looking at here. So each of these in a dynamic RAM are going to be different capacitors. So each of these are individual capacitors that are going to hold these values. Those capacitors are going to hold these as charges. So now the problem that we are going to have is these capacitors are going to lose their charge over time. So the capacitors that were charged will lose their capacitance over time. So what we need to do here is we will have to go to each of these locations one after the other, and what we will have to do is we will have to read them and write them back. So we will read one, write one back in the same memory location. We will read 0, write 0 back. So that is the refreshing process. So over time, before the capacitance value is totally lost, we will go there and recharge the capacitor, for example. The problem with this is going to take some amount of time from the computer's operation or the memory's operation. So what this will lead is, this will delay or slow down the actual performance of the memory. So for example, while the memory is refreshing, if we want to read or write something, we'll have to wait until that refresh is completed. So that is one of the disadvantages of dynamic RAMs that are built using capacitor, because they lose their charges. So we will have to refresh them, and that is going to take some time and inevitably slow down the performance of the memory. So when we look at memory and various types of memory, one of the things to understand is how we can read and write from this memory. Because memory is going to be a large amount of bits that can be stored in a particular medium. So now we need a way to read and write particular parts of that memory. So the memory can be a significantly large space. So there can be, say, in this example, let's take the example of 16 million bits stored in a memory location. So this memory is going to hold 16 million bits. So now we need a way to store at particular points in this memory or particular locations in this memory, and then read that particular part of the memory back. So if we take, for example, different files, we want to store a particular file, and then we want to go back to the same location where that file is stored and read that back. So for that to happen, we need to have a particular way of organizing the memory. And one of the ways that we would organize these memories is using what is called bit words. So bit words are basically a particular length of bits that are grouped together. Say for example, here if we do a 16-bit word, we will divide the 16 million bits into 1 million bit word units. So here we are bringing the number of addressable or number of identifiable memory units down by creating a grouping of bits as bit words. And one of the other things that we can have is, so by using bit words, what we can have is we can reduce the number of units, number of memory units that we have. We can also organize a memory into a memory array. Say for example, what we mean by a memory array is we address that into, say, if we do a 4 by 4, then we have a 4 by 4 array of memory, and then we can read these things at different locations based on that particular identifier for that array, based on the row and column identifiers. So let's look at an example here. So in this example, what you can see is you have the addresses here, the memory address that needs to be read or written. So the memory that needs to be read or written will be identified by the address here. And then that address can be subdivided into a row address and a column address. So then what we will have is the row address can be fed through a row decoder, and that would specify the row in the memory array, and the column address can be fed through a column decoder, and that would specify the column in the memory array. So based on that column and row, we would be able to easily read that particular memory location. So that is a way that we can use memory addresses in a memory array using a combination of addresses that are identifying rows and columns in two different parts. So in addition to identifying these two parts of columns, there can be other components such as refresh counters, timing controllers, input and output data buffers, and so on, that would actually make up a typical memory hardware. But the main idea is the concept of these addresses being split into row addresses pointing to the row in the memory array, and the column addresses pointing to the column in the memory array. Again, if we think about dynamic RAMs and static RAMs, one of the other things that we can think about is there's number of similarities. The main similarity is both of these are volatile memories. So both dynamic RAMs and static RAMs are volatile memories. Flip-flops in static RAMs, if the power is removed, they will lose the bit value that was stored in those flip-flops. In dynamic RAMs, if the power is removed, the capacitors will lose their capacitance and lose the value what is stored in them. But in dynamic RAMs, they are much simpler to build, and they are much smaller and much less expensive. So they can be used in certain memory applications such as main memories. There is the problem of them needing refreshing, but because of they are less expensive and smaller, we may be able to build larger memory units. Whereas static memories, they are much faster, but they are expensive, and they also take up much larger space. So we can only build smaller memories. So they are mostly used in cache memory type applications where we need smaller amount of faster memory, whereas dynamic memory is used in larger amount of much slower memory. Again, think of the memory hierarchy here. Then moving on from random access memory or RAMs, we can look at read-only memories. So the main difference here is RAMs are volatile memories that are going to lose their storage value when the power is removed. Read-only memories, on the other hand, even when the power is removed, the data that is stored in these ROMs will stay volatile, rather will stay non-volatile, so will stay there forever. So that is the non-volatile memories. So these are commonly used as programming units in microprocessors or microcontrollers, or as system programs. So for example, one of the good examples is a BIOS, which is the starting program of a standard computer system or a PC, and that BIOS is stored in a read-only memory. So that read-only memory will be a permanent storage. So even when the power is switched off from the computer, the BIOS program will still be there and will be usable when the computer is switched on the next time. So that is the main idea behind read-only memory. Then within read-only memory, we have a few number of types of read-only memories. So the first type is the read-only memories, or the ROMs, where the data is actually written when the manufacturing is done. So these are written during manufacture. The problem is they are going to be expensive because they are written during manufacture, so it has to be done there. So it has to be a specialist manufacturing process, so they can be much expensive. The second category is programmable or once programmable ROMs or programmable ROMs. These are at the manufacturing point in time will not have any data, but they can be programmed once but cannot be reprogrammed. You will need certain special equipment to program them, but once it's programmed, it becomes a permanent ROM. It cannot be rewritten. The third category is what we can call as, these are mostly read-only memories, but it is possible for us to read and write in them. So there are few number of variations here, things that can be read and or rather erased by UV, things that can be erasable using electric or electrically erasable, or what we call as flash memories. So these are few different types of memories. These are ROMs, but they can still be we can read them but also write to them under certain conditions. So those are some type of ROMs. And the last category of memories that we can look at is external memory types. Again, when we say external memory types, we are talking about external to the CPU, the memory and IO. So we take these things as internal components of the computer, and anything external to this we will call as external memory types. Again, here we can have magnetic hard disks, we can have solid state hard disks, we can have storage mediums like CD-ROMs, DVDs, Blu-rays and so on, and we can also have magnetic tapes. So any sort of storage medium that is outside of the CPU memory IO triology can be considered as an external memory type. Now let's look at cache memory, because it is a particular type of memory application that is very key to how computers are organized or basic computer architecture. Cache memories play a significant role there. So we will look at cache memories in a bit more detail. So the basic idea of cache memory is it is going to be somewhere in between the main memory and the CPU, and the main reason we have that is to make it faster. So one thing that we can understand is CPUs are going to be much faster than memory, and the main memories, based on the technologies that we identified, they are going to be somewhat slower. So if the CPU needs to read much faster, it may not be able to do that directly from a main memory. So in that case, what we will have in between is what we identify as a cache memory, which is going to be much faster than a main memory. So the CPU will be able to read much faster directly from the cache memory. So what we will have here is the data transfer between the main memory and the cache memory is going to be slower, whereas the data transfer between the cache memory and the CPU are going to be much faster. So by using a much faster cache memory in between the CPU and main memory, we are making that memory transfer much faster for the CPU's point of view. Then one of the other things that we can do is, because we have various memory technologies with various different speeds, and also based on the understanding of memory hierarchy, it may not always be possible to have a large amount of faster memory. So what we can do is again have a hierarchy of cache memories, starting from the main memory is going to be there. From there we go to a level 3 cache, for example, that is somewhat faster than the main memory. Then go to a level 2 cache that is even faster than the level 3. Then level 1, which is faster than the level 2. And at that point it is going to be much closer to the speed of the CPU. So now we can have much better data transfer for the CPU with much faster memory here, rather than it accessing from the main memory. So again, this is a way of expediting or giving much faster access to data for the CPU, so the CPU can quickly access data as it's processing at much faster speeds. So this is the very basic idea of why we would use cache memory and how the cache memory is going to be placed among the main memory and the CPU. So the first point is the cache memory is going to be a small amount of data, or small amount of memory, but it is going to be much faster memory. Say for example, if we have a 8 GB main memory, we may only have say few megabytes of cache memory. So say this may be in gigabytes and cache memory may be in megabytes. So the amount of data is going to be significantly different, and it is going to be sitting in between the main memory and the CPU, and it is going to be providing the necessary speed boost that is needed for the CPU in accessing data. So now when we think about cache memory, we will see how this cache memory or accessing cache memory is going to work. So what we will have is, say we have the CPU here, we have the main memory here, and we have the cache memory here. So what we will have is, the CPU will always try to see if a particular data is available in the cache memory. If it is available in the cache memory, it is considered a cache hit, and when it is a cache hit, we can easily and much faster data read and provide that data to the CPU. But on the other hand, if the CPU tries to access the cache memory and the data is not available there, then it will have to access the main memory, and in that case it is going to be considered a cache miss, and if it is a cache miss, we are going to have a slower data read. So if we have a cache hit, we will have a faster data read, and if we have a cache miss, we will have a slower data read. So with this understanding, one of the other things to remember is why we are most likely to have cache hits in CPU or between CPUs and caches is because of the concept of temporal locality of access. When we say temporal locality of access, if we consider a particular program, let's say there is a particular program that has a number of data points there. So if the program is going to access different parts of this, it is most likely to access things that are much closer. So for example, if it is accessing this part of the data, it is most likely to access this next and then this and this, rather than going to a very different part of the program or the data. That is the temporal locality. So we will have what is called temporal locality, whereby we will access things that are closer to each other. Because of this temporal locality, what we can do is, if we load all of these things into the cache memory, or all of the things that are closer to the currently used data into the cache memory, we are most likely to always get hash hits because they are closely located in the cache memory. But in case it is not there, we may have to go in find it in the main memory. And the next things to understand is how the memory structure is differing between cache memory and the main memory. The main point is, main memory is organized based on the word length. We have already looked at this, saying main memory will be organized based on the word length. So if we have a word length of 64-bit, if it's a 64-bit computer, we will have a word length of 64 bits, and the main memory will be organized based on that. On the other hand, what the cache memory will do is, cache memory will select a particular portion of the main memory. It will identify a particular portion of the memory and call it a block. A block is a certain number of words in the main memory, and all of them will be transferred into the cache memory as one single storage unit. So in the cache memory, one storage unit will be a number of words that are grouped together in the main memory. So that is how the storage structure is going to differ between the cache memory and the main memory. So if we look at the main operation of caches, or how cache memory is going to operate, we can look at the steps it is going to go through in working out what is going to happen when a request is coming from the CPU. So initially the CPU is going to request for a particular memory location. So CPU will say, I want to read from a particular memory location. So then it will first check the cache to see if that data is available in the cache. If that data is available in the cache, then that is a cache hit, and then that can be read much faster directly from the cache. But if the data is not available in the cache, then that is a cache miss, and then it has to be read from the main memory. So that is the main difference here. If it is a cache hit, we will be able to read that from the cache itself in a much faster manner. If it is a cache miss, we will have to read it from the main memory, and that will be much slower. And depending on wherever it's being read, it will be delivered back to the CPU. And one of the main things that will be there in the cache to see if it is available in the cache is what is called tags. So cache memories will have various tags to identify which parts of the main memory are available in the cache to indicate whether it is a cache miss or a cache hit. So in terms of request coming from the CPU, what will happen is the request will come from the CPU or the processor to the cache, and it will check if the data is available. If the data is available in the cache, it will be fed back directly as a cache hit to the CPU. But if it is not available in the cache, the request will be passed on through the system bus to the main memory, and the main memory will transfer that data back to the CPU. Now we have already looked at how cache memory organization is going to happen. So we have already identified that the main memory is going to have a number of blocks, and these number of blocks are going to be put together into a single block as a single unit in a cache memory. So a number of words are going to be grouped together into blocks, and they are going to be stored as a block in the cache memory. So in this context, that organization can take few different approaches. So the first one is what is called a direct map cache. In direct map cache, each block will have a particular place where it is going to be loaded in the cache memory. So each block will have a set location based on a particular computation or calculation. So the block address modulus the number of blocks in the cache will determine where that is going to be loaded into the cache. The other approach is what is called a fully associative cache. Here it can be placed anywhere. The block can be placed anywhere in the cache. And a third approach is a set associative cache. Here the difference is they may be placed in certain places, so it's sort of in between direct and fully. And here the main difference is we do the calculation slightly differently to identify where we are storing. We will do block address modulus the number of sets in a cache, and that will give us the place where we are storing. So again, we will come back to this in a bit more detail at a later part of the course at a later point, but this is just to understand where things can be stored. So in direct mapping, because that's one of the easiest way to identify how they are going to be stored, what they will have is each memory address will have two parts. So each memory address will have two parts. The first part and the second part we can identify as the most significant bit and the least significant bits. And the least significant bits would identify the word within a block, and the most significant bit would identify the block itself. So this will identify which word, this will identify which block. So we will have the memory address split into two. one identifying the block, the other identifying the word within that storage location. So depending on that, we will see if this block is in the cache memory or not, and then we can go and read that particular word. If that particular block is not available in the cache memory, then we can go and directly read from the main memory using this. So this diagram shows an example of how direct mapping can work. So here we have these number of blocks that are stored here, these number of blocks that are stored here. And likewise, each particular block will have a particular place where they may be stored. So these two are going to be stored here. So depending on that calculation, different sets of blocks are going to be stored at different places. So what we see is this one and this one are going to go here, and this one and this one are going to go here, for example. So that basically identifies how different blocks can be mapped into a particular block in a cache memory. So this is again just to give you a basic understanding of how cache memory can be organized. We will come back to this in much more detail at a later state. So with that, we come to the end of our discussion into memory and memory organization and how different types of memories can be used in computing system, advantages and disadvantages, and how the memory hierarchy can be used to explain different types of memory. So with that, we have already looked at the CPU, the memory, and the next thing that we will be looking at is input-output devices or peripherals, which we will look at in the next lecture. So if you have any further questions in this particular lecture, please feel free to ask me. You can send me an email or send your request through your standard communication methods. And if you have any particular feedback about this format, please let me know them as well. Other than that, that's the end of the lecture. See you at the next lecture. Thanks. Bye.